It's been said that the second wave of COVID-19 looms in Nigeria, and some countries across the world are already on lockdown. The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has appealed to Nigerians not to lower their guard on the preventive protocols, just as they advise against non-essential travels to countries experiencing a surge in COVID-19 cases. However, for the Yuletide, that's the season just at hand, and the attendant celebration to such festivities, Nigeria has begun to experience an increase in COVID-19 cases, as seen from the figures update from the NCDC. Experts are also emphasizing the need for Nigerians to take precautionary steps by way of educating the public and to be conscious and take personal responsibility of all that is needed to be done. On account of this, what is the adherence rate of Nigerians to COVID-19 safety protocols, and how aware is the public of the second wave of the pandemic? Well, these are some of the areas we'll be looking at on today's edition of the program, Nigeria Today. Welcome to the program. My name is Blessing Abu. In the studio to discuss COVID-19 and taking personal responsibility, let's welcome Dr. Isaac Akuma Egboja. He's a public health specialist. Welcome to the program, Dr. Egboja. My pleasure. Good evening. Also with him in the studio, let's welcome David Akoji. He's a special assistant to the Director General, National Orientation Agency, NOA for short. Glad to have you with us, sir.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. These are not new things. Both of you at different times have been on the program to look into this issue, as well as other areas of interest as it concerns COVID-19 and its management in the country. A second wave looms, and this is much critical than we're even thinking about it. Isn't it so, Dr. Egboja?
Certainly so. But before we say anything, as our usual habit, let me please use this time to thank all those who have been fighting this pandemic, especially all health workers wherever they are, at whatever level, and the Presidential Task Force for the job they have been doing very well. I want to thank everybody who has made contributions, including the NTA too. Your contributions have been enormous, and we want to acknowledge that. Well, now, unfortunately, we are expecting and more or less experiencing a second wave, because last Friday we recorded over 700. In fact, the largest number since this pandemic started and since Nigeria experienced its own case. And it is worrisome, because by now we should have been expecting to do much better than we are doing. Since we now have more experience than we did when we started, we now know where to go for help, what to do. At the beginning, we didn't have any knowledge of what to do, where to go, and so on. Lots of what we did at the beginning, back in February, March, April, were trial and error. We've more or less perfected those procedures. Guidelines have been issued by the Federal Ministry of Health, by the Nigerian Center for Disease Control, NCDC, and also by the Presidential Task Force. And therefore, we should have, at this time, been at a level where we should be celebrating that we have been able to conquer this enemy. Unfortunately, it is the enemy that is probably now shouting at the top of the hill that it is conquering us. But we need to fight harder and defeat that enemy.
Okay, Mr. Akoji, I'm sure you're as bothered as everyone who is on the front line, because you need to give this message from time to time and to appear as if no one is listening.
Well, just like Doctor said, the figures are becoming worrisome. The week before last, the records show that we saw an infection rate of about 1,607. Now, last week, we have seen figures to the tune of 3,820. That represents about 142% increase in infection rate, if you are looking at the statistics. Now, that gives enough reason for worry. Now, worry in the face of the fact that Nigerians are still not taking personal responsibility. If you go to public spaces, you still find that people are not adhering. People are going about their businesses as though nothing is happening. The isolation centers are beginning to get a lot of occupants once again. The PTF had said in one of their briefings that state governments should prepare to reopen isolation centers. All these are indicative of the rate of worry arising from the fact that Nigerians still are not largely taking personal responsibility as is expected, even in the face of these figures that show that we're witnessing some form of resurgence, you know, of COVID-19.
Okay, just to point out what you part of things you said just now, states governments are now being advised to actually open up the isolation centers. That means most of them have actually closed shop. That is what it means. And if we're doing a whole lot of testing in the past weeks or months, definitely perhaps we could have even done more. I wouldn't know, but I just thought I should just underline that particular sentence from you. Now, for people to take a personal responsibility, which is now very key for us, what would you be conversing, especially now? Yes, the protocols are there, and like you pointed out, people are giving so much disregard to the basic things to be done. Keep a safe distance, and if you must step out, you make use of the mask. But a whole lot of people, from the market to everywhere you get to see, everyone just, it's as if they don't even believe it's real still.
Yeah, that comes to me as a bit of a surprise, especially reflecting on the kind of reactions we're seeing from various influential persons in the past before this time. We had incidents where highly respected religious leaders were disputing the existence of the virus itself. I recently watched a clip, a testimony clip from the senior pastor, I think, of the Family Worship Center, Pastor Sarah Omaku, where she narrated her experience with the virus and passionately appealed to members of her church to take this virus very seriously and to also take the issue of adhering to the protocols very, very seriously. We have also seen traditional rulers, highly respected Nigerian traditional rulers, also drawing attention to the need for adherence, you know. So we think that there's adequate reason for Nigerians to actually begin to protect themselves from contacting this virus. And this is largely because the situation is more dire today than it was when lockdown was declared. Why do I say so? Our borders are open once again. There's travel, you know, within and without, you know, the country. We have seen people coming from some of the worst hit countries coming into Nigeria. There are issues about the observance of the travel protocols, you know, and how some people are subverting these protocols and entering into our populations. And then we have seen the adverse effects that the virus is having in countries like the United States, in Germany, in Britain, you know, and some of these countries are already considering new, fresh national lockdowns. Now, we know what we went through when we had our own lockdown here. We know how tough it was. I don't think we want to see ourselves back in that same situation. So it does call for personal responsibility. Okay.
Now, considering the fact that some people with COVID-19 are definitely asymptomatic, that's we have come to understand, and transmission definitely will keep moving in such circles without people giving heed to what it should be. Dr. Boja, how do we step in at this critical time?
Well, the most important thing, first of all, is to accept the fact that there is COVID-19, to accept the fact that there is coronavirus spreading everywhere, and not only in Nigeria, throughout the whole world. This attitude of denial is the worst thing that anybody can do. There are several stages when somebody is confronted with a disaster. The first stage or phase is denial, and the next one is acceptance that, well, it is bad, but it is true. Then the third phase is to recover from the impact of that disaster. Now, many Nigerians are still doubting the fact that we have a problem at hand. That is very unfortunate. We've sung about this, we've talked about this, we've preached about this. I do not know now how much more any Ministry of Health or NCDC or the Presidential Task Force can do or say than they have done. All the guidelines that we need have been rolled out, and all we need to do now is to implement them. So the most important thing is for us, for those who are doubting, to believe that yes, it is true, coronavirus is spreading everywhere, COVID-19, the disease, is among us, and we need to fight it. Secondly, we need to take personal responsibility. Personal responsibility means that even if my neighbor, even if my friend, even if my family members, even if my colleagues or whoever is around me is not doing anything to prevent himself or herself, I will do my own part to prevent myself. This is one of the key things that we can do. It is very important, and I would want to say this. I, as a doctor, or any other doctor for that matter, anywhere in the world, have never been in a situation where one person is sick and you treat another person for that sickness and the sick person recovers. It does not happen. It is a sick person that needs to be treated. And if somebody is denying and expecting that some other person will take responsibility for the presence of this disease, and therefore the person will be protected, it is a fallacy. We must take individual responsibility. A few days ago, I was very impressed when I entered somebody's car, and the person, the owner of the car, looked at all of us that entered. There were three of us, and he said, all of you, your masks, please. I already had my own. And the person next to me, to my right, he had this dark, thick mask. And the owner of the car said, Oga, the mask you are wearing is too thick. I don't think you can hold it for too long. I'm going to give you a lighter hospital type one that I have in the car. He had extra ones in the car and he gave. This was very impressive. Why? Because he was not only taking responsibility for himself, protecting himself, he was taking responsibility for all of us in the car, passengers in the car. And of course, when you look at it, indirectly, he's taking responsibility for himself because he was likely going to be infected if he didn't take that care. And that's one thing that we must have to do everywhere, at home, at work, on the road, especially during this travel season when people are going to be traveling, when people are going to be packed like sardines in cars, in vehicles, in trains. We need to be able, even if we are in a situation where we are not able to keep the recommended physical distance, we should be able to protect ourselves by first sanitizing our hands, secondly wearing our face masks.
Okay, Doctor, those were some of the things we'll be looking at the second side of this discussion when we get back from this break. You're watching Nigeria Today, and our focus is on COVID-19 and taking personal responsibility. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. If you just tuned in, the program is Nigeria Today, and we're taking a look at COVID-19 and taking personal responsibility. So I have my guest in the house, Dr. Isaac Eboja is a public health specialist, and also Mr. David Akoji is a special advisor to the Director General National Orientation Agency. Mr. Akoji, now before this second wave experience and all of that, the ease on the lockdown came with the resumption of civil servants as well as others who were actually asked to stay back home, and gradually the economy opened up. So many people who felt they were caged started to come out in their droves, and at a point it was like, okay, yes, we were held back for so long, but now we're going to throw caution to the wind. In fact, some people were saying, okay, no, the type of COVID-19 we have here is different from what is being experienced outside the country. Of course, we know that is not true. COVID is COVID everywhere. And how difficult is it for your agency to actually get this message around? And what is the level of compliance and adherence to such?
I think the point that you made is relevant and will also help this discussion. That point of the attitude that followed the relaxation of the COVID-19 lockdown protocols. What we experienced was that Nigerians largely interpreted that relaxation of the lockdown protocols to mean that we are out of the woods.
Sure.
And that things had returned to normal, you know. So like you rightly observed, people came out of the lockdown protocols and unleashed themselves to various things that ought to still have, you know, to restrain themselves, you know, from. We have discovered that the attitude we're seeing is not born of a lack of knowledge of the protocols, you know, because there's been intense sensitization by National Orientation Agency, NCDC, civil society organizations and other stakeholders. And this sensitization has penetrated even to the grassroots, you know. So what we find is that for some reason, Nigerians simply do not want to comply. Recently, we carried some sensitization to schools, you know, to see how far compliance is with the school reopening prevention protocols for COVID-19. The reports that we got from the field were very disturbing. In a lot of these schools, the wearing of face masks, the triage points, the washing of hand, you know, points and all of that were not being observed as ought to. So that sensitization actually led to reawakening. And then they found out that, okay, government is still very keen on ensuring that these protocols are maintained. Now, in the larger society, the Director General of the National Orientation Agency just last week, Tuesday, flagged off persuasive compliance to COVID-19 protocols by the War Against Indiscipline Brigade, which is a volunteer brigade of the National Orientation Agency. Okay. Now, we are changing strategy. We're saying that the challenge is not with knowledge of the protocols. It's simply that people are not complying. So how do we keep reminding them, even if subtly or firmly, that you must adhere to these protocols for your safety and for the safety of other people that are around you?
That's very some relief. And let's push further. Dr. Eboja, community testing. Earlier on, before the break, Mr. Akoji made mention of people traveling in from wherever, mostly countries heavily hit by COVID-19, and borders are open now. People are coming in their numbers, and people will be moving from the urban areas to the hinterland for the festivities that usually characterize the end of the year. And if we're not taking it serious, even at the urban area, what kind of messages will be given to those in the rural areas? And even if we have such, with the kind of attitude, how do we get people to actually get tested at the community level?
Well, this is a very important question. I would advise that all states, not some, all, especially those states who have been, which have been lucky, that hadn't had many cases of coronavirus and therefore have been relaxing, to now take this case more seriously. This second wave may in fact affect those states more than the previous ones. Why? Because they have relaxed their own rules earlier than they should have. Two, many of them are not tested as they're supposed to be testing because they feel, well, this coronavirus is in Lagos, Ogun, Abuja, Plateau, Kano, and so on. In my own state, I'm talking of some states, in my own state we have had only 2, 3 or less than 100. So why do I have to worry? you need to worry, because people are traveling around the country. People from your state are in one state today, in the next day they are in another state, and the next day they are back to your state, especially at this time of the year. People are traveling from one part of the country to the other for marriages, for weddings, for burials, for all kinds of situations. And there are crowds everywhere. Sometimes people don't even care or remember that there is still COVID-19. They are not adhering to any protocols. They are not sanitizing their hands. They are not wearing masks. They are not keeping physical distancing. Nothing. Therefore, we need to do more tests. All states are advised to do more tests, to go to communities where they have not reached before and go and test. The only way we will know that those communities are safe is when we test and we find that there are no cases in the communities. Don't sit anywhere and assume that a particular local government, for example, you've never had a case of coronavirus from that local government, and therefore it is okay and you don't have to worry. You might be surprised that that's where the problem is. I would therefore advise that all states start testing, and like the NCDC, the Presidential Task Force, and the Federal Ministry of Health have instructed, every isolation center should be reactivated, cleaned up, dusted up, got prepared in the event of new cases, so that they can admit them and treat them properly.
But do we foresee a possible lockdown if we continue at this rate without people actually heeding to some of these advices?
Certainly, certainly. If I am the Minister of Health and it gets to a point where it was when we had the first lockdown, I will very freely recommend to the President to initiate another lockdown. What is the lockdown for? It's to hide us from death, to hide us from calamity, to hide us from disaster. If people are not behaving themselves, unfortunately, we're using those harsh words, and they're not adhering to the protocols, and they are exposing themselves to risks and dangers, and exposing other people to risks and dangers, there's no other way than to compel people to comply.
Yes. By way of rounding up the discussion, what more would you like to see to further drive home this point of people taking personal responsibility?
I think that we, as patriotic Nigerians, have a mutual responsibility to protect one another. COVID-19 is manifesting asymptomatic in people whose immunity are very strong, especially those within the youth age bracket. But it is claiming lives, you know, and it is sending people to hospitals. If we continue to see these kind of figures like what we saw last week, 3,820 positive cases, and there's increase in testing. So if those increase in testing also result in increase in positive cases, then some drastic measures might become necessary, like Doctor said, especially in states that are recording high figures like Lagos, Ogun, and Rivers. You know, so I think the state governments should also now be on their toes and become more active in the area of ensuring that people adhere to this protocol.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. David Akoji, Special Assistant to the Director General, National Orientation Agency, NOA. Thank you very much for coming on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
We'd also like to appreciate Dr. Isaac Eboja, Public Health Specialist. Thank you so much for your insight as well.
You're welcome, my pleasure.
We'd like to appreciate you for watching Nigeria Today. Nigeria Today is live every weekday on NTA News 24 at 7:30 in the evening. You can watch this edition or any other edition of the program at youtube.com/NTA News 24 hub. My name is Blessing Abu. Thank you once more for watching.